Hello and welcome. Was it enough? US President Barack Obama delivered his much anticipated address to the Muslim world from Cairo, but many are questioning the value of it. Since his inauguration, President Obama has been reaching out to Muslims in the hopes of repairing East-West relations. He did so in his first official interview given to an Arab network, and then again in Turkey, and even delivering a direct message to the people of Iran on the holiday of Nowruz. His previous efforts had brought expectations to such a height that many analysts said the president was doomed to disappoint a Muslim community that was waiting for deeds, not words. Here at home, his critics accused him of going on an apology tour. In just under an hour, the president covered a lot of ground, from America's relations with the Muslim world and its military actions in the region to the all-important US stance on the Israeli-Palestinian situation. We ask, were the president's words enough today to change the direction of East-West relations? Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. Log on to livestation.com/AJE, enter the chat room and take part. And of course, we also welcome your phone calls on the show. Joining me today from New York is Dr. Saad Eddin Ibrahim, an Egyptian human rights activist who spent 3 years in prison for what many believe were his criticisms of the Mubarak government. Today, he's an advisor to the organization Voices for a Democratic Egypt. And here in Washington, D.C., Ambassador Thomas Pickering is the former U.S. Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs and served as U.S. Ambassador to Israel and Jordan. He's currently co-chair of the International Crisis Group. Gentlemen, I welcome you to the show. And Ambassador, if I could start with you here.
Thank you, Riz. Sure.
And start saying, what was missing? What did President Obama fail to deliver in this eagerly anticipated speech? Did he raise expectations too much?
No, I think that quite the contrary. Of course, one speech isn't enough to answer your question. It has to be followed through. What I think he did was he went over a number of very delicate subjects that you and I know over history have been very tough. Some very tough for Arab governments to answer, some tough for Muslim governments to answer, some very tough on the process. He did it in a balanced way. It was a balanced speech. It contained, in my view, quite a bit of wisdom. It was U.S. policy because the president said it right there and then. You don't have to have any questions now about how he feels about democracy. My view was that democracy piece was particularly difficult for him to present. He did it in a very careful way, and you're left with the view that democracy is important, but it's not going to be the reigning and governing instrument for all U.S. policy in the Middle East.
But sir, was it anywhere enough on the Israeli-Palestinian issue? I mean, he seemed to put Israel and Palestine in parity, but he wasn't critical of Israel on the human rights issue, and won't the Arab world take that as simply as business as usual?
I think not. I think, of course, he came out against violence. It was particularly, unfortunately, maybe read as being violence in the Arab world, but he came out against violence, and I think that's important. I think that in some ways he said as clearly as he had, for the first time in 2 or 3 decades, that settlements are out. And he didn't qualify it. He didn't say expansion. He didn't say new outposts. He didn't say a little of this and a little bit of that. That was very strong and very firm. But he also said to the Muslim world, Israel is there. You're going to have to contend with it. It won't go away. But then he said, Palestine is there. And Israel, you're going to have to contend with it. It won't go away. It was a speech that I thought was a success because we all know the extremists, from Iran to Likud, to some of the other organizations, Osama and Al-Qaeda, didn't like it.
Well, I'm going to put this to you, Professor Saad Eddin Ibrahim. It's good to have you with us as well, sir. Now, I'm wondering, how you rate the content of the speech. He of course, referred to the Quran. We'll refer to some of these a little bit later in the show, but he also didn't use the word terrorist. He used the word Palestine. But did he really go far enough? Did he cover enough? Was there enough depth in the speech, in your opinion?
Well, I thought he did, as much as anyone sober and knowing the American scene could expect. He was very reconciling, was very firm, was very fair. And I think the fact that he talked about Muslim communities, not about the Muslim world, was also well pointed. The fact that he mentioned Iran by the name that the Iranian regime likes to be called by was also very pointed. The Islamic Republic of Iran. And I think he said, as the ambassador pointed out, he said enough about democracy and human rights to satisfy dissident and democratic advocate like myself.
Nice.
And I hope that behind closed doors he went beyond that a little bit further to at least plead the case of people like myself who have been on the run because of the Mubarak regime. But all in all, knowing the American scene, knowing the American politics, I think he is probably as firm as President Eisenhower was, as compassionate as President Carter was, as knowledgeable about the intricacies of all the problems as Clinton was.
Now,
so
Professor,
he has, in a way, combined all those three, and all three are well remembered in modern Arab history.
Okay. Professor, I know that you consider a venue as important as the speech itself, and I wonder, because you weren't that happy with the venue he chose, Cairo, Egypt, as the location. When he did speak out on democracy, one man shouted out, "We love you." Now, isn't that the kind of message you want the Egyptian government to hear?
Absolutely, absolutely. And by the way, I did mention the reason why I wanted either Turkey or Indonesia in the beginning and Cairo to come third. Well, he did Turkey first, and then this is Egypt second, which is fine because he has other important regional issues on his agenda besides democracy and human rights. And I appreciate that. As a realist, I appreciate that. I was warned by his advisors that that's basically what's going to happen, and that on this first trip to the Muslim world, it is really Palestine and Iraq and Afghanistan and all the open wounds that he likes to start the process of healing. And then he will probably tackle the issue of democracy head on in his second or third year.
Well, we've got a caller on the line from Germany. Good to hear from Germany. Messier, what would you like to add to the conversation?
Yeah, Riz Khan, I'm very happy of watching your program too. I'm very happy with it. Thank you very much for that, with the media covering that. But Riz Khan, I wanted to tell you one thing, the Muslim world today, I think the best way is for the Muslim world to unite is to work together. But the Muslim world cannot work together. And trust them, they are in need of help from the European Union or from the American. Why can they not themselves work together and help themselves together and help the poor Muslim together and remove the Muslim poor people from this
Messier, what I will do, let me put this to Ambassador Thomas Pickering here, who's with us. This was an interesting point. The speech was pitched pretty much at the Muslim world, although it was pretty much directed in many ways at the Arab world. What Messier is saying is interesting, that it's hard for the Muslim world to work together. What's your take on that comment?
Well, I think it is, but it's hard for the Christian world to work together. And it's hard for the Jewish world to work together. They all have differences in views. In some ways, what the president was saying was that our differences among ourselves mirror one and the other in a reflective way what the problems are. And to come together means we have first to come together among ourselves, but we also have to come together as people who represent or are part of religious groups or ethnic groups. He talked a lot about tribalism, interestingly enough. And that was quite interesting because obviously I think it reflects his travels and experiences in Kenya, which is a country I know quite well. And I thought that was interesting, perhaps a little beyond where the Arab Middle East is, but certainly an appeal to what I would call Muslim Africa in that way. And so those pieces were interesting. But to some extent, of course, the Muslim world would like to and should come together, but we all know that one of our great problems as human beings is finding ways to kind of build a consensus and bring things together. One of the great advantages that this man has, certainly in his public speaking and in his ability to launch ideas, is to provide what one would call the seed corn, the central kernel around which this can be built, how he puts these concepts out in a way that is so balanced and so fair and reciprocal that it's hard for reasonable people to say, gee, I can't agree with that man.
Well, it's interesting, and Professor, if you can note this too, the president brought his own personal background into the speech by emphasizing the common ground or perhaps bond he has with the Muslim world. Just listen to this very short clip of where he talked about his middle aim.
Out of many, one. Now, much has been made of the fact that an African American with the name Barack Hussein Obama could be elected president.
Professor, I wonder, with the campaigning prior to his election, he was being so careful about his Muslim connection or his Muslim name, I guess, in the middle. I wonder how that would have resonated with the audience that was listening there in the Middle East and throughout the Muslim world.
I maintain that was brilliant, and I think it was very measured. So he acknowledges that he is a Christian, but he has Muslim ancestry, and he is not hiding it. He is proud of it. It is a state of fact. And he actually made an educational point that that is what America is, a pluralistic society that will always give a chance to anyone who's striving for self-improvement and who's striving for being counted in a democratic, open society. That was brilliant. It was educational for Arabs and Muslims to hear that as well. And I think to be a role model in that respect.
Well, let's see quickly what Nasser in Jordan has to say. Nasser, what would you like to say?
Yes, how are you? Mr. Khan.
Yes.
The president's speech is, or Mr. Obama or any other president past George Bush is really a positive move. It is welcome. But the point is the president talked about peace. The central issue is the Palestinian question. He has not gone far enough to recognize immediately the right of the Palestinian people to have an independent Palestinian state recognized by the United States. The goodwill speech that is so general is not sufficient enough.
Okay.
And when he talks about human rights, he talks about the minority rights, we are very well aware that we in our region have paid a very dear price for what one man has done in Afghanistan. We are tired.
Okay. Nasser, what I'm going to do is I'm going to address your issue in just a moment after we take a very short break, because we have other questions on that very issue. So as we continue our break, or as we continue into our break, let me remind you, you can join the conversation with your questions and comments by logging on to livestation.com and entering the chat room. You can see there's a debate taking place in there right now. We'll be right back with a comment to Nasser's views and other questions too. Stay with us.